create UFO experiences? What is the nature of reality of UFO events? Welcome to another episode of Cosmic Road, where I explore all the mysteries of the paranormal with your assistance. Today I'd like to talk about a fascinating new article that has just been brought to my attention, and I believe there is a lot of reality in this article because the nature of reality itself seems to be malleable. I know that's weird and that's going to turn a lot of people off, but the nature of our reality seems to be malleable, and the nature of our interaction with UFOs, or the intelligence behind the phenomenon, seems to be malleable as well. It depends on the person. Different people at the same place looking at the same UFO can have a different experience. What does that mean? I don't know, but let's dive into it. It's called WandaVision and the UFO Co-Creation Hypothesis. As pundits and advocates for disclosure keep pushing forward to make UFOs respectable, an independent observer might notice an interesting peculiarity in their collective strategy. They want us to focus merely on the low-hanging fruit of cases in which well-trained observers reported objects that could be construed as highly advanced aerospace platforms, while discreetly sweeping under the rug decades, if not centuries, of confounding observations which defy simplistic explanations. Among those, the unproven assumption these unidentified objects are structured craft from a different star system. In other words, the nuts and bolts phenomenon. One example of this strategy is reinterpreting old cases using contemporary jargon in order to make them fit into a coherent narrative, i.e. browsing the literature in search of tic-tacs similar to the ones observed by their star witnesses David Fravor and Alex Dietrich, showing a complete disregard for historical context and personal interpretations by the original reporter. Okay, I disagree with that. You can call these objects different things, but if it looked like a tic-tac in 1947 and it still looks like that now, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can, back then they may have called it a gas tank. A big white oblong gas tank. Looks a lot like our tic-tacs. Whatever, I'm not going to quibble with that particular thing, but let's go on. Elizondo and his allies want to move from the silvery saucers of the 50s and the black triangles of the 80s to the white tic-tacs of the 2000s. Never mind the fact that close encounter reports constitute a veritable cornucopia of mystifying objects and entities of all shapes and sizes. And it's not just that we could rationalize the variety shown in the accounts as proof that we are being visited by more than one group of aliens, each with a different technological capability. Many of these impossible, unidentified flying objects could not only defy the laws of gravity and conservation of energy, but even the most basic laws of aerodynamics. Consider, for example, the mysterious airships which were flying around the American Midwest in the 1890s. Now, this is interesting. These extravagant dirigibles with potent searchlights, propellers, and stabilizers would fit perfectly in a Jules Verne novel, yet they would have been completely impractical for air transport, even with aeronautical innovations that were just a few decades ahead of the time. In fact, one head-scratching commonality in the majority of the UFO reports is that the objects described by the witnesses seem to display technology that is just slightly ahead of the witnesses' cultural level. Very interesting. One of the most interesting cases in the ufological annals is that of Nebraska patrolman Herbert Schirmer, who in '67 claimed to have been taken aboard a disc-like craft by short UFO-nauts with tan skin and cat-like eyes. Inside the saucer, Schirmer was given a quick tour and a brief explanation of the ship's functioning. The leader of the occupants told him they had been extracting energy from the local power lines. Why would a superior race that is supposedly hundreds or thousands of years more advanced than us would need to rely on the theft of a few 100,000 volts of electricity to power up a spaceship capable of negating the Earth's gravity is something ufologists never seem to worry about too much. Well, I do, because that matters. Shermer is hardly the only witness who claimed to have been inside a flying saucer, and all of these accounts describe technologies that would have looked otherworldly for people in the 50s or 60s, but that in our age of iPads and wireless devices feel more like retro-futuristic. Wouldn't space aliens have progressed beyond the need for levers and colored buttons to control their vessels? This is one of the inconvenient truths most UFO researchers choose to overlook when selling the idea of space visitors to the public. The phenomenon seems to conform to our cultural expectations. That's interesting when you consider the UFO cases south of the border in Mexico and South America, where they see big, weird-looking worm-like things in the sky, or dragon-like things. And if you look at their history, one of their gods, one of the Aztec gods, was the feathered serpent. So that is very interesting. There is a lot of truth to that. One researcher who decided to take a plunge into the deeper waters of the UFO pool was Greg Bishop, author of the books Project Beta and It Defies Language. Instead of focusing on the nuts and bolts aspects of the UFO enigma, which have dominated the field for the majority of its history, Greg chose to concentrate on the witnesses themselves while applying the tools of psychological perception and information theory to their accounts. Over the years, he has been coalescing his thoughts about UFOs into what he calls the co-creation hypothesis. So what exactly is the co-creation hypothesis? Simply put, it's the proposition that during a UFO event, the witness is not a mere passive spectator, but is in fact an active participant in the creation of the experience. Confronted with something that falls completely outside the person's habitual frame of reference, their mind desperately tries to fill in the gaps in order to make sense of what it is they are witnessing, using their own cultural and psychological baggage as a sort of perceptual scaffolding. Interesting phrasing. As Greg wrote in the essay quoted in the beginning of this article, how much do we bring to the dance during a paranormal encounter? In other words, how much of the UFO experience is the result of our subconscious mind trying to make sense of unexpected, startling, and/or frightening input and leaving us with an insane placeholder when it can't decide on anything else. To someone who has been conditioned to conceptualize UFOs strictly from a perspective influenced by the old science fiction expectations of interplanetary visitors, what Greg proposes may be difficult to grasp, which is why we are now going to use a more contemporary example of science fiction which perfectly illustrates the concept of co-creation. Instead of the day the Earth stood still, we're now going to step into the wacky world of WandaVision. I'm not going to read that. There you have kind of a belabored metaphor with WandaVision, just trying to use some sort of current event to make their point. Personally, I thought that was a little stretched. But the general point of, Greg Bishop and his theory of co-creation, I think, is dead on. UFO sightings and experiences are strange and nebulous. There's a lot more going on than just mere nuts and bolts, craft and incidents, and beings from another world in our reality. There are interdimensional consciousness aspects to all of this that are very fascinating and exhilarating. They're also scary and uncomfortable and weird. You look at Skinwalker Ranch. It is a weird place. When Lou Elizondo, who is like the most nuts and bolts guy of the nuts and bolts world, when he was asked about Skinwalker Ranch, his answer was about spirituality and consciousness and about the transition of human consciousness from the time of birth and death and how little we could perceive of the cosmos that we live in. So, yeah, this is a weird subject and a weird part of this weird subject, but it may be the important part. What are we dealing with here? Is it just little green men from another world in our reality, the next star system over? Or are we co creating interdimensional hyper consciousness events that deal with something much greater and more interesting? Now, I believe personally that some UFOs and some aliens are simply beings from other planets in our Milky Way galaxy or even another galaxy. However, there do seem to be a range of different sort of being that people are interacting with. Some seem to be just regular old aliens. Some seem to be more consciousness or dimensional or whatever. A lot of people that are abducted see the dead, whether that's their own relatives that have passed on or people like Einstein or Tesla that seem to be alive and well and working with the visitors aboard their ships doing something. And that goes along with what some near death experiencers report that they have seen aliens or other non-human entities in their encounters and have had some knowledge gathered about those beings, and they say, some of them say, that those beings are working with the other side, the spiritual beings or whatever they are working with those higher dimensional beings for various projects. Now, they don't know what those projects are. They didn't expound on that very much. They may not be allowed to know a lot of information that people gather when they are dead and come back, or when they are abducted and come back, which are very similar incidents. But a lot of that information is removed from them. That is wiped from their memory when they return to awareness. So why that is? Well, obviously they learn something that they aren't supposed to know in this reality. So there are greater truths that apparently we can comprehend, if not in this reality, then in the other reality. But we are not allowed to know. The beings that are in other dimensions, or whatever you want to call it, aren't allowing us access to some of this information. And so we may never know. Or it may be that our consciousness, the human awareness as a whole, needs to raise to a certain level, and when greater truths can be opened to us. And I am hoping that is the era that we are living in, this whole UFO disclosure stuff. That could very well be the first step on that journey. Some of us might even live to see, its conclusion. Maybe not. I mean, this could be a thing that's hundreds of years in the making. But I try to be optimistic, and I am as hopeful as I can be that some of these greater truths we will learn. But at any rate, I think that this co-creation hypothesis is fascinating and on point. There does seem to be some there. In fact, I think there's a lot of there. I just don't know what it means. If you know what it means, please let me know in the comments below. This is such a fascinating and strange subject, and we know so little of it, other than it's nebulous, it's weird. Reality itself does seem to be malleable in some fundamental ways. If you want to learn more about that, read the works of Whitley Strieber, for example, and others. At any rate, interesting stuff and very relevant. I hope to get to the bottom of it one day. I probably never will, but let me know in the comments below what you think about all of this. Is this too weird, or are you way ahead of this and you know what's going on? If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. Also, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and if you do, the bell next to it to be notified of future videos. Of course, please comment below. Let me know what you think. And until next time, Cosmic Road out.